Hello, and welcome back to Dystopia Now. I'm Kate Willett.
I'm Emil Torres.
And today we're going to do an episode that is a little different than the ones that we normally do. I'll explain for a second. So, as you know, listeners, fans of the show, we normally talk about tech and tech billionaires. And, we kind of talk about politics through that lens. And today I wanted to talk about something else that is really important to me lately, and for a long time, honestly, which is Cuba, and specifically the United States' relations to Cuba and lifting this blockade that has existed for decades and decades, but the Trump administration has made so much worse. This is another way of saying I'm gonna be gone next week because I'm going to Cuba with a group of influencers and journalists and, hopefully to raise awareness. But I wanted to let listeners in a little bit on something else that I'm doing that is very important to me. And we're lucky to have a guest today who is a true expert on US Cuba relations who can illuminate what's happening for us. Because, I do think that most people, if they heard the details of this blockade, are like, why are we doing this? This is just completely insane. But I think, unfortunately, this is a very undercovered issue in both, traditional media, but also on social media. I just don't really see that much awareness about it. It's growing, but today we wanted to focus on just letting people know what's going on, like kind of getting the basic facts of the situation, because I do think that they kind of stand for themselves. So yeah, Emil, how are you feeling about all this? Yeah.
I think the situation with Cuba is a piece to the larger puzzle, right? I mean, the Trump administration feels like there aren't any constraints, right? So obviously, people are familiar with talk of annexing Greenland, maybe invading Canada. I mean, we mentioned on previous episodes that Canada is quite literally kind of preparing for war with the US. Obviously, then there are the strikes in Iran, and in the aftermath, I think it was the first day there was up to 180 children who were killed, quite possibly as a result of AI systems, Claude specifically, the large language model, the AI model developed by Anthropic, targeting some place that was right next to a school. So in the aftermath of that, Trump said something like Cuba is going to fall next, right?
Yeah.
And so I feel like focusing, Cuba, to put it differently, Cuba is kind of like a microcosm of the dire situation that we're in right now, whereby the Trump administration, I think, poses a very significant threat to global peace and geopolitical stability. Right?
I
Right. I mean,
completely agree. And
yeah,
actually, as we talk about it, I think one thing that I want to say is that I don't actually think that this is separate. Trump's particular flavor of imperialism, I don't think it's separate from all of these, tech billionaires and bros that we talk about on the show, because one of the things that these guys want to do is have their little cryptocurrency colonies everywhere. And that
yeah,
is how they view Latin America in general, as like a place that, they could go to have like their mansion paradise and pay for everything in Bitcoin. And they cannot accept the idea that there would be any government in Latin America that wouldn't let them do whatever they want. And
yeah,
I think that most of the reason that Trump is really, really focusing on, I will speak about this with our guests as well, but I think that, most of the reason that Trump is focusing on Cuba and hurting Cuba so intensely, is both an extension of what has been US policy for so long, and it's also, a kind of renewed interest of Trump's because of, other neocons in the Republican Party, like Marco Rubio, for example. But,
yeah,
I think that in general, Trump is also, he's, he keeps talking about the Monroe Doctrine of, wanting to, you know, achieve like complete control over the Western Hemisphere, United States control. And, I think that it just really isn't separate from like the fact that all of these, billionaires that he hangs out with all the time are, talking about, how they want the place to like build their little techtopias. I can't say that
Yeah.
that's for sure what's going on, but that's certainly who's in his ear with Greenland, And so
Yeah.
I think as we talk about U.S. imperialism on the show, it does make sense to like think about who Trump is talking to and what his larger project is. Anyway, I
Can I
know.
just add something real
Yeah,
fast?
absolutely. Yeah.
Which is that I would recommend a video that Gil Duran put out discussing the reasons that tech billionaires are interested in Venezuela. Right. So I
Yeah.
mean, you mentioned Latin America. Like there are like that's not just an offhand remark. Like people are in Silicon Valley are specifically interested in Latin American countries. And so I know Gil has much deeper knowledge than I do on this particular issue. So these things, I don't think you're wrong to suggest that they're connected.
So today we actually have one of the most knowledgeable guests that I think that we've had on the show. Certainly someone who is deeply, deeply knowledgeable about Cuba and U.S.-Cuba relations specifically. So I'm very excited to welcome David Ramirez Alvarez, who is the second secretary at the Cuba Embassy in the United States. And we're just very lucky to have him. Welcome to the show, David.
Thank you very much, Kate, for having me here. For us, it's an honor to participate in your show, which is so wonderful, and we have learned so much from everything you guys do every week about international policy, U.S. policy. So thank you.
Thank you so much. So, if we could start with just a little primer on what's happening right now, and let's say the audience for this, I think, is people who are not in favor of hurting any other country, but they may not know a lot about what's happening in Cuba specifically. So, if you could just kind of start with the basics.
Well, yes. Thank you so much. Well, in order to give an assessment of what's going on between Cuba and the United States, and give a quick summary of more than 67 years of difficult relations with the United States, maybe we can talk about the Helms-Burton Act. Right now, today, actually, March 3, the United States is commemorating the 30th anniversary of the enactment of the Helms-Burton Act. The Helms-Burton Act is basically the legislative scaffolding of what we call the blockade against Cuba. It's a it's a document that was passed in Congress in 1996 that many people consider it a legal aberration because of all the international and national laws that it violates, because it basically interferes in foreign affairs, not only regarding Cuba, but regarding third states. It was a document that was passed in one of the most difficult periods between Cuba and the United States. We did not have diplomatic relations. We had what used to be called an interest section between both our countries, and it was actually during the Clinton administration. So now it's a 30-year-old legislative document that basically codifies the blockade and what you call here in the United States the sanctions policy against Cuba. But the blockade against Cuba is actually more than 65 years old. Since Kennedy in 1961 or 62, if I'm not mistaken, he passed what it's called the full embargo against Cuba, where they basically prohibited any sort of trade and any sort of engagement with our country. It was in a moment that Cuba was developing its revolution, that it, for the first time in decades, had a sovereign government in power that had a national viewpoint of, taking into consideration the everything that had to do with the national resources to the people, for the people, and by the people. And obviously, it generated a difficult situation with the United States interests. And not to go into too much detail, basically, we are here today, 67 years later, with full embargo against Cuba, with the Helms-Burton Act in place. The Trump administration, first administration, imposed more than 242 measures of economic coercion against our country, on top of activating what they call the sponsors of terrorism list. The United States keeps us on this list. On top of that, you have the Biden administration, which basically did not do anything to change the U.S. policy against Cuba. Ironically, after the President Obama, imposed or announced a different rapprochement policy in regards to our country, where we learned that in less than 2 years, how fruitful having better relations with the United States could be for both the people of Cuba and the United States. But well, that it actually happened 10 years ago, but it seems to be like a century ago because of all the animosity expressed by the U.S. Federal government against our people. And right now we are in a very complicated point. I would state that we're in one of the most difficult points in our history regarding the relations between Cuba and the United States. The executive order by the White House announced on January 29th basically called Cuba an extraordinary security threat to the United States, which, to be honest, is very hard to believe. And from that moment on, basically has been imposing a coercion, hard policy coercion in regards to any country that dares to deal with Cuba in regards to trade in fuel. So since December, we have not had access to international oil or fuel within our countries. This is something horrible because right now it is having a direct impact in all of our national services, local services, anything that has to do with hospitals, schools, transportation, public, private, anything, you name it. It's becoming increasingly difficult for our government to allocate funds and budgets to keep our basic services intact. But the good news is that we are not crossing our arms. We are looking for ways to get out of this situation, increasing our access to solar energies, our investment in solar energies, because fortunately, for the moment, you cannot blockade the sun. But unfortunately, at the same time, it's not very easy because these are expensive technologies, and we are going through a very difficult situation.
What is the U.S. argument for why Cuba poses a national security threat? Because obviously, during the Cold War, Cuba was part of the this clash between capitalist democracies and communism. These days, like, why is it the case that there continues to be such extreme hostility towards Cuba?
Yes, thank you for the question. Basically, right now, I don't think they even used a specific argument to call this a national security threat. Basically, for many years, in order to keep us within the state sponsors of terrorism list, they pursued this idea, this narrative that Cuba was a sponsor of terrorism because we were holding terrorists on our country that had to do with the ELN in Colombia, where actually we were, sponsors of peace talks with these people and the Colombian government, together with Norway. And it was very funny that specifically before Trump left office in the year 2021, about 8 days before leaving office, they put us on the list using these specific arguments. And obviously, it's totally ridiculous. They have used arguments that we have specific, facilities, military facilities from other countries in our nation, and we have expressed dozens of times that this is totally false. The only military facility that is in Cuba that is against our national will is actually the Guantanamo Bay military base, which we have for decades asked the United States to give it back to our country. It's a space that is our national sovereign territory, and we want it back. So basically, that's more or less the argument that they tend to use.
That makes sense. I mean, I don't want to say that makes sense. I guess what I meant to say is thank you for explaining, because truly none of it makes sense. I've been to Cuba 2 times, and guys, listeners, I just want to say there's like not really terrorists hanging out there. It's people just chilling, and also, I mean, Cuba is a very tiny country. Like the idea that Cuba poses any kind of threat to the United States is ridiculous. The idea that, Cuba is a state sponsor of terrorism. I mean, if you look at, like Saudi Arabia actually has, had a connection with the September 11th attacks, and they're, one of our closest allies. And I mean, there's just really been no instances ever of terrorism coming out of Cuba. This is not a real thing. So I mean, all of these justifications I think are extremely pretend. One thing I wanted to ask you to elaborate on is the nature of what Cubans call the blockade. I think a lot of people believe, okay, the U.S. is not going to trade with Cuba. No, imports or exports between those two countries, but it's actually way more far-reaching. Can you describe for our listeners what the kind of multiple aspects of the blockade is, what the laws are, how they pertain to other countries beyond Cuba and the United States?
Yes, thank you for your question. Well, as I was explaining before, it's a huge infrastructure of laws that have been imposed in the U.S. against Cuba that have a direct effect not only against our country but against third parties and third countries in other in the whole world, and that's why we call it blockade. There unfortunately there is sometimes a debate that whether it's an embargo or a blockade. We call it blockade because it has an effect, a direct effect on the people of Cuba, and does not allow us to have normal relations, economic relations, trade relations with any other actor around the world. So you might say that the infrastructure of the blockade has to do with what we explained before, which is the Helms-Burton Act, which has about four specific titles that basically enforces different actions against economically against our country. For example, if we want to acquire a specific good, a specific service from anywhere around the world, the product has to have at least less than 10% of American components. Otherwise, we're not allowed to acquire. So many times we go through different problems where we have a specific service that we use from maybe Europe, for example, with thermoelectric plants or refineries. We have equipment that came from Europe from many decades ago, but all of a sudden an American company buys this specific company that we dealt with. So from that moment onwards, we have to stop dealing with those people, and we have basically a whole infrastructure of equipment, of pieces that we need to restore and do maintenance with, that we have to basically stop doing business with. And the same goes to buying products from, I mean, anything, basic goods, food, medicines. If they have at least 10% of American components, basically you cannot get it. So we have a horrible example during the pandemic where we had to basically we were dealing with like everyone, with shutdown, with gas, that the oxygen tanks that were having issues with oxygen tanks in hospitals. And we had a friend who actually wanted to donate a whole airplane filled with oxygen tanks to Cuba. And basically the United States government prohibited this donation from another country very far away because the plane was a Boeing airplane. So can you imagine how horrible this can be, to be dealing with a pandemic, people dying, people suffering, people struggling, and the United States government executing this measure because the plane was a Boeing airplane. And this is just one small example. I mean, right now, because of this actual fuel blockade being enforced against our country, there are about more than 96,000 patients in waiting for surgeries, very important surgeries to be done, that basically are waiting in line because hospitals are, only doing basic procedures. We have had to postpone cancer surgeries, oncological surgeries. More than 11,000 children are being impacted by this situation of energy asphyxiation. Right? We have maternal homes that have stopped doing X-rays for more than 32,000 women because of issues as basic as not having, the energy to power a highly expensive equipment. So it's such a huge infrastructure of laws and measures against our country that it is so hard to talk to you about in less than 45 minutes, less than an hour. There's the executive actions by the United States government, where they are prohibited entities lists and prohibited accommodations lists to the United States people. And this is an angle that is almost never talked about. I mean, this blockade is two-sided. The people in the United States are also being impacted by it. You do not have the freedom to travel to Cuba for tourism. You have to travel through 12 specific categories. It is very hard for you to do free trade with Cuba. You need an OFAC license by the Treasury Department. And there is so much that we can talk more about.
I mean, I'm thinking about Cuba has produced some, incredible medical advancements. I think I read about a promising vaccine for lung cancer, a drug that can stop the progression or at least dramatically slow the progression of Alzheimer's disease. I mean, these would make such a giant difference to so many people in the United States. And the idea of just like, I mean, it's just, I think Americans people in the US lose out a lot more than you think with this blockade. So talking about the oil blockade specifically, I read on Twitter last night, you'll have to tell me if this is true, that I think December 3rd was the last time that any fuel was let into Cuba. Can you talk about what's happening there and like what life is like without power in Havana and also, in other areas of Cuba?
Yes, obviously it's. I mean, it's sad, but unfortunately, the world of the 21st century still needs to operate with with fossil fuels, and dealing with this situation, reminds us how important it is to make this, needed transition to renewable energy sources. And right now, that's basically what we're trying to do right now. We're trying to enforce getting solar panels. We are receiving a lot of donations on solar panels, but our government, our country, has had to adjust in less than 3 months to a new way of living. There are people that are, I mean, for example, basic public transportation has stopped. We are having almost to zero public transportation. Universities, high schools have stopped, zero schools operating. As I was explaining before, hospitals are only doing basic procedures. Clinics are almost closed. The working force are basically being sent to their homes. People are in their homes. Some of them are getting their salaries, usually when they are, public workers, government workers. But the private entities, I mean, they cannot pay salaries to people that are home without work. life has changed drastically, drastically in less than 2 months to a focal basic situation where the government has to deal with the basic issues and not more, and at the same time take care of the people of our country. And we are so happy that we are receiving so much solidarity from across the world, from around the world. There are people in the United States that are doing donation drives to try to help different hospitals, different schools, and install solar panel energy systems. And at the same time, we are happy to announce that in the last 2 3 months we have had one of the biggest increase of solar capacity in our country in comparison to many other countries in the world. We just reported a record of 1,000 megawatts generation in peak solar time, that which is actually very substantive in a country that basically demands about 3 gigawatts daily, right? The only issue is that when you generate solar power, you also need to store, right? You need storage systems, which are very expensive, and that's our main deficit right now. And that's what we're working on. We are definitely not, we're not laying back and, and sitting down and not doing anything about it. We're trying to work out how to make things better and how to get back on track, and resist and look for a better future for our people.
You mentioned the word asphyxiation, which just seems so apropos. I mean, it's just the picture you're painting looks so dire. I can't imagine it. I can't imagine being there and dealing with all of the unnecessary, gratuitous suffering and harm that is being inflicted upon the Cuban people by the U.S. for no apparent reason, really, no good argument. Um, which I guess gets to my next question, which is, um, how do you think this ends? So maybe on the one hand, Cuba is able to enhance and expand its solar energy infrastructure, such that things like the oil gas blockade that doesn't have a significant negative impact on those people. But alternatively, like maybe there's some kind of deal. There's some way to reestablish a working relationship with the U.S. So my question is, like, what is the U.S. demanding? Like, what are they saying that Cuba needs to do for them to relieve, uh, all of the harms that they're inflicting right now?
Yes, I mean, the demand of the U.S. government has basically not changed in decades. It's basically the same MO. They want our country to have a different political system, to have a different type of political system, more in line with the U.S. Way of doing politics. That's basically their demands. They accuse us of being a communist dictatorship, a totalitarian communist dictatorship. There have even been very strong statements by high level officials saying that we are enemies of humanity. Um, Basically, the status quo is the same, the mo is the same, the narrative has not changed, and it's very sad because that's what we're here for. We're here to do diplomacy. We're here to build bridges. We're here to make to open opportunities of engagement between the people of Cuba and the US, and we're here to be serious people and to try to work out a middle ground, an understanding. We have stated so many times that we're open to a dialogue, to a respectful and honest and candid dialogue with the United States. Uh, but the only condition, which is nothing that is too hard to ask for, is that the United States respects our independence, our sovereignty, our nationality, and this is nothing. This is not. I mean, this does not have anything to do with the way that we organize our political system or with a specific ideology. This has to do with our history. We are, in Cuba, we consider that when we are being threatened, that when our country, our security is being threatened, we, gather around the flag, we gather around our nation, and we protect our nationality because that is something that we have protected and we have fought for centuries. It doesn't have to do with a specific ideology or anything. It has to do with our, feelings of patriotism in our country. And when you want to, condition a dialogue uh, by changing our way of doing, and or existing, or our way of being a country, then that is not a serious dialogue, and it's not based on good faith.
Both Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio have said that their families fled the authoritarian communist state in Cuba. Could you explain why that's inaccurate? And then also, I'm just curious, if you don't mind me asking, like, what what does it feel like to be in Cuba and see people who have their genealogical roots in Cuba now holding positions of power in the U.S. um, and advocating for policies that are harmful to the communities from which their families came.
I mean, yes, there is unfortunately a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of disinformation regarding the Cuban community here in the United States. We consider that the Cuban community in the United States, above rhetoric, above policies, above propaganda, the great majority want to have better relations with their country, with their national, I mean, with the land that they were born with, that they descend from. And there are several polls that always state that they want to continue to do remittances, they want to continue to traveling to our country, they want to continue going back and forth, trading with our country, investing in our country. And it's unfortunately that there are many politicians in the United States that exploit quite the opposite, whereas the people of that come from Cuba here in the United States are very hardworking people that in private and in public state to us that they are tired of the status quo, they are tired of this hostile policy, that they want to be like any other country in the hemisphere that has a diaspora, that has a direct connection to the country, and that want to come and travel back and forth without any restrictions, without any political estrangement and distancing. So the main message is that there is a lot of misinformation, a lot of fake news, and that we consider that the majority of people from Cuba here in the United States are not at all, in favor of this hostile policy by the United States government against Cuba.
Yeah, because my understanding is that actually the parents or the relatives of Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, they fled from the previous Batista, if I'm remembering correctly, regime, which was before Fidel Castro took over. So oftentimes they have repeatedly said in public that, oh, it's because of communism that we ended up, my family ended up in the U.S. That's just not true, right?
Also, does someone have fireworks going on in the background?
So I'm in Spain, and little
Yeah.
kids
Oh,
buy
nice.
these balls of gunpowder, and they blow shit up
Oh my
every day from
God.
dawn, from like 9 a.m. until 11 p.m. It's insane. This is a whole other conversation, but it's insane. I can't do anything about it. This is my like work environment. Bah,
Oh
bah,
my
bah,
gosh.
constant. So really sorry about that.
So back to Cuba. How is morale in Havana and outside of Havana? Like how are people doing with these devastating changes? I was thinking the other day about if something like this kind of imposed economic crisis happens in the United States, I honestly think that there would be people being violent towards one another. There would be, there would be just, a lot of hate and a lot of violence. And that doesn't seem to me like what's happening in Cuba at all, or how people are treating each other at all.
Yes, the issue is that we are used to this. For decades, we have been used to this. Going up and down with rhetoric and having a better situation or a worse situation, a more hostile and a more engaged, focused situation with the United States. And we have a people, a society that has adapted to be innovative, to always search for a way out from their problems on their own with their own resources, as few as they might be, as scarce as they might be, and we are really proud of that because we have, we have so many cool, experiences of finding ways to step up our game and to seek for a different moment with our, with a better future for our people, and that's what
People are
happens.
really picking
We
themselves
also
up.
practice. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
People are picking themselves up by their own bootstraps. I mean, it's
Yeah.
very American in a sense. Like you're adapting, you're doing whatever you have to do to keep going. And I'm sorry for interrupting you there. Please continue.
No, thank you for your words. And basically, yes, that's what we're doing. We also practice. We don't only practice solidarity with other countries around the world. It is a common practice between each other. So, I mean, in Cuba, our neighbors are like our families. We help each other constantly. If somebody needs, somebody needs sugar and we have sugar, we share the sugar. If somebody needs coffee and doesn't have coffee, we share the coffee. But if somebody has to do plumbing, has a plumbing issue at home, if we are able to, lend a hand, we do it because it's how we have grown as a society for so many decades. And it's obviously also has to do with the socialist system that we have in our country, which is focused on the human being, focused on the people. We and this is something that we replicate not only in our neighborhood, we replicate it in the biotech institutions, as you were mentioning before, in which we are only centered on preventing, diseases, on preventing um, epidemics, pandemics, and that's why we have had so many good results in doing research against lung cancer, for example, against the diabetic foot from amputations and ulcers. We are now working on a medicine called neuroepo, which treats early and middle stages of Alzheimer's. And there's so many opportunities that we have, for engaging with the United States through our biotech. But the results that we have had through our biotech has been because we have scientists that have actually been able to seek for answers with the few resources, with the scarce resources that we have, and have been able to, use, I mean, resources or materials that usually scientists in other countries do not even think about because they have everything in their hands to seek for. So it is something that is ingrained in our DNA now, in our blood. It is a result of decades of resistance. It is a result of so many years of hardships. And there is always a joke that we have cars that are moving with motors of washing machines, and this is a fact. We have made this happen, and we have been able to repair machinery that are decades old. For example, with our thermoelectric plants, with the innovativeness of the engineers that instead of not having access to a spare part, they have access to their ingenuity, and they try to constantly fix the problems that we have.
I'm so impressed. I'm so impressed with the resilience and resourcefulness of the Cuban people, but at the same time, I think it's cruel that the United States, keeps expecting that, or in some way, like people shouldn't have to be resilient all the time. People should get to chill, and just enjoy their life, and be with their friends and family. And the U.S. cannot tolerate cannot tolerate a country with a different way of life or different political system. I think in terms of explanation for this, why this is, a lot of people in the US will offer the explanation that that it's because of the electoral politics in Florida, because there are Cuban people diaspora that are very, very against the current Cuban government, and they're putting pressure on political candidates who especially who run for president, to have very harsh policy towards Cuba. To me, I'm kind of confused, and I don't know if I think that's the explanation at this point, because Florida is so solidly Republican that it's like no Democrat is going to win there. It's pretty much set. So that doesn't seem true to me anymore. I guess why do you think that people who run for president or senator or Congress, like what's motivating them to take these very sadistic positions towards Cuba?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, this is my personal opinion. They have an obsolete and you know very very ignorant view of what Cuba is, and sometimes it pushes their policies, their agenda. But you know, the Obama administration and the engagement that we had in at the beginning of in 2016, 2015 proved that there is a different way to deal with Cuba, and that it's highly popular, it's highly accepted, and basically it's uh, basically an alliance of mainstream media that also ignores a lot about the reality within our country. And unfortunately, there is a lot of misinformation about our people and about our political positions in regards to the United States. It is very, scarce when when you read a headline that says, Cuba is willing to sit down and have a dialogue, an open and candid and honest dialogue with the United States, and that's something that we have been saying for decades. And you never hear on that, you never hear on on mainstream media that we were open to trade with the United States if the United States is willing to trade with us. And we are open for investment, for foreign investment, and that we're open for American tourism.
Mm.
And you only get the the hardliners talking points. And that is why we're trying to work out and reach out to more people here in the United States. And obviously that is why we appreciate the opportunity of sitting down and having this conversation with you guys, who are awesome.
You mentioned trade, investment, and tourism. Um, how Cuba is open to those things. What do you see as some of the other like biggest misconceptions that Americans have about Cuba? Right? Because I mean, I grew up being told that Cuba is like is kind of the enemy. They're they're a bunch of communists and so on. And that was I feel like that's to some extent kind of like in the culture. Like their cigars are really good, but um, the country
Yes.
is it represents something that that it is worth us in the U.S. fighting against. So, like, yeah, what are some other examples of like if you got a chance to talk to somebody on the street, what would you say? Like, you are understanding Cuba in the wrong way.
Yes, yes. I mean, there's so many misconceptions. I mean, the first misconception is that Cuba is not a safe place, which is totally false. We have one of the safest countries in the whole hemisphere. Basically, the United States has put Cuba like in a tier 3 uh, country that is not safe to travel to, which is totally false. I mean, we have one of the highest, you know, security in the Caribbean. We have one of the most beautiful beaches in the world. We have, very welcoming people. I mean, there is also that's also a misconception. There's a misconception that, if an American comes to Cuba, they will be treated badly because they are American, and it's quite the opposite. We are very friendly to the American people, because we are a very welcoming people. We are a very welcoming country, and it's not, it doesn't have to do with, your nationality. It's part of the way of conducting ourselves as a society. And yes, we have one of the best cigars in the world, but we also have one of the best rums in the world. And we have beautiful coral reefs and so much, beautiful, natural sites and biodiversity and beautiful, beautiful fauna, and that you almost never see that, and neither on Discovery Channel or National Geographic. You only get the communist boogeyman, right? Which is totally false. And we are there is also a misconception about, our political positions in regards to other countries. We always pursue dialogue. We always pursue, a friendly conversation. We have great relations with, almost every country around the world, and we have trade with almost every country around the world. And yes, I mean, there is so much that it could be learned from, coming to Cuba. So I ask you, what are the misconceptions that you have about Cuba? Maybe I can answer if it's true or false.
Yeah, I just talked like 20 people into going to Cuba. I'm organizing a delegation next week, and I'm thinking about the questions that people asked me, and people were, yeah, a lot of people were like, are we welcome there? Do they hate us? And, I told everyone that based on my experience, Cubans are going to be really glad that you're there and very nice to you. I mean, I mean, I think that you'll have to answer this, but I think that people in Cuba know that not every person in the United States is a supportive of this insane blockade. I think, in fact, that when they've pulled it, the blockade is very unpopular, and people want normal relations with Cuba. Don't see any reason for this wacko Cold War nonsense anymore. I guess what do Cubans think about people in the United States?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. My experience after being about more than 3 years here in the US is that every person that we talk to is friendly to us. The first thing after we say that we're from Cuba is like, oh, I would like to go to Cuba. Can I go? Is it
Yeah.
possible? The second thing they say is, oh, I love Cuba. I love the people of Cuba. I love the culture. I like the music. I love the dance. I love the cigars. I love the rum, the beaches. It's, you know, 99% of the times we get friendly reactions. And I'm not being, I'm not, giving you a story for you to fall
Yeah.
for. This
Of
is
course.
this is real life facts, and we have traveled to southern states, red, blue states, and they are all very friendly to us. And most of the time, they consider that the U.S. policy is obsolete. It's not gotten anywhere after decades of hostility, and that they want to have better relations with the people of Cuba, with the government, with our businesses, with our cultural institutions, with basically everyone.
I think as an American, I feel so privileged because having traveled quite a bit, it is amazing how people consistently, even in countries that are on the receiving end of American hegemony, et, et cetera, um, how they are able to distinguish between the U.S. government and the U.S. people, right? And there are so many places where they say, yeah, like your government, I think is terrible, but you have nothing against the people. Um, that's not always the case in the U.S., right? Oh, you're from Haiti or from Nigeria or something. Like that fact alone makes me, sort of like single you out as problematic in some way. So I guess there's a sense in which I'm not surprised that Cubans are so welcoming to Americans, despite the fact that our government is in my opinion so awful.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming on the show, David. This has really been an interesting and informative conversation. And I guess, just to close out, is there any way that do you see that, people in the United States can support Cuba right now? Obviously, I know it's very difficult for, people in the US to, to donate money directly to like a nonprofit in Cuba, or it's I don't know, but like, how can people actually help?
Yes, thank you so much for having me here. It's been a great experience with you guys. You guys are great and highly appreciated again. And to answer your question, I mean, come to Cuba. I mean, that's the first answer. Come to Cuba, visit us, learn from Cuba, from from your own eyes, from your own experiences. Don't listen to us. Visit Cuba, live the experience. And the second answer is that yes, there are people in the U.S. that are organizing and doing several donation drives, and there's a few organizations that have licenses to send aid to Cuba. Some people are doing drives to buy solar panels for our country. Some people are doing donation drives to get medicines to our people. Some people are organizing to travel to our country. So yes, that's basically it. My advice is that you come to us, to our country, you visit us, you live from our country, from our experience, and then come back and you know, uh, share this experience with the people in the United States. Usually, everybody's like, "Wow, this is a life-changing experience." For many years, I have been lied to. I visited Cuba, I came back, and it has nothing to do with what I learned. And this we get this talking point constantly.
Yeah.
So honestly, thank you so much for this opportunity to speak to you.
Thanks for joining us.
And thanks so much. And yeah, and I do want to say that it is, and I think one thing that, a lot of people in the US don't know is that it is legal to go to Cuba. Like, you can buy a flight on American Airlines. There are multiple flights per day. There are some restrictions about where you're allowed to spend money in Cuba, and, you need to pursue educational or humanitarian activities. But, it's basically legal, just like straight up legal to go to Cuba. It's not hard to figure out. You can just fly there from Florida. And it's like an hour. It's an hour long flight. So yes, I hope you do consider going to Cuba, listeners. By the time you hear this episode, I may be in Cuba myself. So I'm really excited to visit next week. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you very much.